summer, it's when the city comes alive. After months of gray skies, rain, and dreary weather, Vancouverites are out soaking up the sun and blue skies. Among them, tourists here to swim, hike, and enjoy Vancouver's natural beauty. Greenery lining the mountains and Stanley Park, a sign of Vancouver's temperate rainforest ecosystem. It may be why people think a large-scale fire could never happen here, but hidden beneath Vancouver's natural beauty lies an imminent threat, one that could be set off by a single spark. Across the globe, the climate has been changing, natural disasters increasing in both scale and frequency.
Southwest France, as huge wildfires continue to burn, the worst in 80 years.
A major fire now rapidly tearing through Southern California again.
Wildfire on Vancouver Island continues to burn out of control.
The wildfires burning in Los Angeles have turned deadly.
Officials warning it could be about to go, quote, nuclear.
2025 now on track to become the second worst wildfire season in Canada's history, and it's not over yet.
A special investigation will delve into how a large-scale urban fire like the one we saw in Los Angeles could potentially set alight here in Vancouver. In this special, you'll hear from scientists who explain why the environment is primed for ignition.
I think it's really important to recognize that nowhere in British Columbia is immune from wildfire.
What kind of concerns me is that we're providing these points where wildfires can ignite and spread all over the landscape.
That's the thing that as leaders in our fire department that we're most concerned of.
But certainly we know that wildfire risk on the coast is growing.
Provide an ignition, a source of fire can very rapidly get out of control.
We've learned anything can happen at any time, and it can happen very quickly.
Many feel safe within the boundaries of a metropolitan landscape. Here, they feel a world away from wildfires. But Mother Nature doesn't abide by city limits. Burning Point, how Vancouver is on the brink of a wildfire. Professor John Clegg has been studying environmental shifts for over 3 decades. He says there's been a prominent change in the past 2 years.
Climate change, we've seen already an increase in global temperatures and temperatures in Canada, not just globally, enough that it's extending our wildfire season. I remember when I first came here 55 years ago, the summers were fairly short and September was a rainy month. Now we find that you could arguably say summer goes from April right through September, a very long period of time. And also the warmth is drying out our forests, so it's having this impact of causing our forest soils and the trees that grow on the landscape to be stressed and to be subject to drought conditions. We live on the wet coast, and in a sense, we don't think of wildfires as a problem. However, we're increasingly seeing wildfires in similar wet environments. So for example, Halifax, 2 years ago, had a terrible wildfire that burned 150 homes and displaced 16,000 people. So I think that we should not think that we can't get fires in Metro Vancouver. I think we can, and the likelihood of that happening is going to increase as our summers get warmer and possibly longer. So we're just at the kind of entry point in time of climate change. And so this problem that we're talking about is actually going to get worse with time.
It's a sentiment wildfire researcher Kelsey Copes-Gerbitz agrees with.
Climate change is absolutely affecting the frequency and severity of wildfires. Here in Canada, actually the Pacific Coast region, which we're in now, is expected to see some of the highest increase in average annual area burned by 2100. So in the next 75 years, we are going to see growing areas of wildfire on the coast, and that's a reality that's already coming to light. I think it's certainly possible that we could see a wildfire here in the greater Vancouver area We're surrounded by forests, and we have a lot of homes and businesses that are built directly into the forest. I think we are in a different ecosystem type than you would have in Los Angeles, but certainly we know that wildfire risk on the coast is growing.
So John, we're here at the Squamish Airport, and I believe you're going to take me on one of your environmental surveys?
Yes, we're going to see how the forest has changed through the air, Kate. And to do that, we're going to just jump on this plane and go.
Okay, let's go.
Squamish traffic, Cessna 172, Charlie Golf, Papa Victor X-ray on runway 115, departing now.
All right, John, we're currently flying over West Vancouver. Why is this area considered a threat?
West Vancouver and North Vancouver are very rapid growth. More and more people are wishing to live on the North Shore, so you're placing people in harm's way.
Well, you definitely don't get these views from the ground.
So this is the beginning of this very high-priced real estate that's kind of at the edge of the forest, but you can see there are patches of forest embedded in it. And we're going to come up on an area that they're extending this up the slope right to the boundary of Cypress Provincial Park. Given the terrain, it can be very difficult to fight a fire once it initiates. You have to take into account how you're going to evacuate people from those high elevation slopes in the event that a fire does occur and you do have to evacuate. And we learned that lesson in Los Angeles, where people were unable to get out of harm's way.
John, you've been studying BC's environmental shifts for over 30 years now. What have been some of the biggest changes that you've noticed?
Wow, I've seen huge changes to our environment, largely through population growth and the intrusion, if I can put it that way, of development, housing into our forest lands. That's totally changed our landscape. I have also seen an increase in wildfire aggressiveness, so maybe not the numbers, but the actual spread, rapid spread, and the damage that these uncontrolled fires are causing. The other really important thing that I've really noticed is the loss of snow and ice in our mountains. Tremendous amount just in the last 3 decades. We've lost so much snow, so much ice. You know, we have about half the glacier cover that we did 100 years ago. And that's an ongoing process related to climate change. So our summers are getting much longer. We have had increasing droughts, warmer temperatures, and all those add up to an increase in the stress that our forests are experiencing, and ultimately probably lead to stronger, larger wildfires.
Why are flyovers like this one so important in your line of work, and what does it teach us about preparing for natural disasters?
Flyovers are very important because they provide you a perspective that you don't get from the ground. You sort of see the forest for the trees from the air, so to speak, and you can see damaged forests, you can see the effects of wildfires. So when I fly, I can see these areas of cut blocks, I can see where fires have initiated, how widespread they are. It's a tool for actually documenting in a quantitative way how that environment is changing, which is very difficult to do from the ground.
BC's wildfires have seemingly become more frequent, more intense. What does the science say behind this?
It is settled that wildfires are being exacerbated by a warmer climate, by warmer winters and more drought, longer periods in which we don't have precipitation. All these kind of weaken the forests in a sense and make them more prone to larger, more difficult to control wildfires.
Stanley Park, an iconic Vancouver landmark, is a hotspot for cyclists taking in the trails and pedestrians taking in the views. The 1,000-acre urban park is home to around 18 million visitors annually, some 49,000 per day, even busier during peak seasons like right now. And each and every day, a near 60,000 cars travel through this causeway, passing beside the trees that line Stanley Park. And it's here where trouble could first brew.
A major road that goes right through Stanley Park. I think 60,000 people take the causeway between the North Shore and Vancouver. I worry a little bit about careless smokers just throwing a cigarette butt out the window and providing the ignition for a fire in Stanley Park. I mean, to me, we have not only this dense canopy of forest, but we also have a lot of people who use the park or pass through the park. And so, not that it has to happen, but it's kind of a situation where you might expect a human-caused fire to get out of control.
We're on one of the many hiking trails here in Stanley Park. When you look around, how could a wildfire start here?
A wildfire would most likely start through human carelessness. There are lots of people who use the trails. Some of them are smokers. The biggest problem is people discarding cigarettes, but also maybe not so much in summer, but I would suspect it does happen. People actually build fires, on the ground in the park, and that's dangerous because that provides a spark that allows a fire to spread.
What would the main source of fuel be here when it comes to igniting a potential wildfire?
You can see in the forest some big trees. They're spaced far apart. These are old-growth trees that, for whatever reason, were not removed when they logged in the park I think in the 1880s. In its place, there's been this regrowth of hemlocks, Douglas firs, creating this spindly-looking forest that we see around us. It's not a natural forest, and there's more fuel as a result of all these very closely spaced small trees. So if you kind of think of what it was originally like, the trees are widely spaced. This would not be a situation where a wildfire would spread very rapidly, but now it is because it's a different forest.
How could a wildfire potentially spread to the neighboring West End?
The danger might be from embers. If you get a canopy fire with winds blowing, burning embers, they can actually move well ahead of the fire front and pose a danger to surrounding areas where people live.
So wildfire spread really depends on certain factors, primarily on wind. A strong wind is going to be more likely to push fire and push those embers further. If you have no wind, 2 kilometers might be a general rule of thumb.
Our experts have flagged the forest lands on the North Shore and Pacific Spirit Park as areas of wildfire risk. Here on this map are the neighborhoods within a 2-kilometer radius. Homes in this zone could be at risk of catching alight by embers, and under the right conditions, Kelsey Copes-Gerbitz warns fire embers could spread even further.
So a fire can potentially move up to 10 kilometers with really significant wind events. And we've seen that certainly up in the north where fires can move really, really quickly, and they can throw those embers or those sparks up to 10 kilometers ahead of the moving flame front. And certainly what is concerning is if we have fuels that are very dry and susceptible to igniting, like we might have had during the heat dome when we had really unprecedented levels of drying and long-term drought with the heat dome on top of that. And so then when you get those ember showers that are 2, 5, 10 kilometers in front of a fire front, you then might have those embers landing in fuels that are very susceptible to burn. I think it's important to recognize, though, that we do live in a summer dry climate, and we know with climate change that it's likely that our summers are going to keep getting drier and hotter, and that certainly increases wildfire risk. I think the other concern is that so many homes and businesses are within what we would call the wildland-urban interface, which is anywhere where forested vegetation meets communities. And those areas are highly susceptible to wildfire, and it's important to kind of understand what the forest is and how that might be contributing to wildfire risk.
We're here on one of the many hiking trails in West Vancouver. There's a residential area just 500 meters away. What is it about this area specifically that makes it so vulnerable when it comes to wildfires?
When we see places that have hiking trails right next to communities, we're more likely to get human traffic into the area. And with humans comes the opportunity for accidental ignitions and the potential to start a wildfire. We also have to think about what the conditions of the forest are like near these communities. So let's go and have a look deeper into the forest to understand what factors contribute to that.
Looking around here, how could a fire start?
What we might see is an ignition in, say, that pile of sticks over there. Pile of sticks that you might have if you build a campfire or a bonfire. In a forest like this, we could see that start from a lightning ignition, or because we're right next to a trail, you might have someone accidentally throw a cigarette butt into the forest. So we would see that fire start and move maybe along the ground in those surface fuels, and then it might catch onto the tree next to it that has all of these dead branches that are really low to the ground. Those dead branches would act like a ladder up into the tops of the trees, and that would be a real concern for communities.
And how might that spread to residential areas?
So crown fires are a real concern. One, because it can be very difficult to direct attack. So put firefighters in front of a crown fire because they can be really dangerous to fight. And then also because those crown fires can create embers or sparks that would potentially go into the community from the forest.
In the event of a wildfire in the mountains here on the North Shore, there are many things to consider: properties, lives, and livelihoods. But nestled in these mountains is a lifeline that over 1.9 million people depend on, and that is water. You see, the North Shore houses 2 of Vancouver's 3 watersheds. The Seymour and Capilano watersheds supply approximately 70% of Vancouver's drinking water. And in the event of a wildfire in these mountains, well, that tap could very well run dry.
Wildfire would have a long-lasting bad legacy on the quality of runoff in the streams that are tributary to these reservoirs. That organic material being burned leaves behind an ash. That ash, when it runs over the land, it carries with it a lot of contaminants, chemicals, sediments, and all of that is going to actually find its ways after the forest is burned into the reservoir. Depending on the severity of the wildfire, we could be for months and years not being able to serve the 2 or 3 million people living in the lower mainland safe water quality.
This vulnerability is something the city says it's prepared for.
So for us, if we had a water supply that was impacted by wildfire, we would have to take offline. We have things like a post-wildfire emergency recovery plan, where we would look at what we could do to the slopes that had been burned over to preserve the material that was there so it wasn't actually coming into the reservoir and impacting our water treatment plants.
All right, ready for some water?
Yeah. A wildfire here in Metro Vancouver water source could be very damaging for us. Metro Vancouver's water supply is a surface water supply. So what that means is we rely on rainwater and snowmelt as it travels through the forest to fill up our main reservoirs. So if we lose the trees, that means there could be potential of debris, landslide entering into our reservoirs that could be challenging for our water treatment systems. That's why a firm watershed protection program is so important for us. Yeah, every spring we run all of our staff through our basic wildfire suppression. So those staff go through the basics of pump operations, hosing, and it's all preparedness for if a wildfire starts, that we have a lot of resources. Part of the protection of these lands includes a strict closed access policy. So what that means is general members of the public are not allowed into these areas, and that greatly reduces our risks of wildfire. To give an idea, the region on average uses about 1 billion liters per day of water, and that could go up to 1.5 billion liters in the summertime. So if we were to lose a water source in the summertime, that would be very drastic for us. The amount of time, if it would have to be taken offline, would really depend on the location, the size, the fire intensity. At our water treatment plants themselves, there's a lot of redundancy and flexibility that allows them to increase their treatments as much as possible to try to treat what water is coming in, to make sure it's clean for the public. Our Metro Vancouver system is resilient, has some flexibility, and we would rely on our other 2 water supplies and reservoirs if needed.
So just how prepared is the city?
If those worst case scenarios came true where a fire ignited in a vulnerable area, we're focused on doing everything we can to prevent that scenario.
Tonight, our team travels to Lytton to discover what lessons were learned following the devastating 2021 disaster.
We have to get out of here. I just knew we had to get out. We've learned anything can happen at any time, and it can happen very quickly.
All this and more coming up on Burning Point, Vancouver's road to wildfire resilience. In June of 2021, the western part of North America was hit with an unprecedented heat wave. At its epicenter, the village of Lytton, BC, where the temperature hit a staggering 49.6 degrees Celsius, the hottest ever recorded in Canadian history. A wildfire would ensue, destroying 90% of the town in under 30 minutes. The now Lytton Mayor Denise O'Connor was a retired teacher at the time of the disaster. She recalls the moment she realized something wasn't right.
Looked at my phone, and on Facebook it said there was a fire at the south end of town. So I'm situated here at kind of the north end, so the fire started at the other end of town. So I went out on the sidewalk and looked down the street, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, buildings were on fire and trees. I mean, it was just a plume of smoke and dark smoke and ashes were kind of blowing this way because the wind was extremely strong from the south. So my husband was actually out here on the deck of the other house reading, but of course it's all behind him and he had no idea. And I said, you know, we have to get out of here. I just knew we had to get out. So I went out to the car, and other people, I could see them running around. I could see fire coming along the railway tracks above town. I could hear a horn honk of a semi. I could see it heading down the street, and the horn, they were blaring their horn. I think it was to warn people. I was able to come in and grab a couple of things. I grabbed my mother's rings. I don't know why I didn't grab my passport or other things that I had in that drawer, but I grabbed that. I grabbed our toothbrush bags out of the bathroom. Really, that was about it. My laptop, because I'd had it by the door. And literally got in the car and followed a group of people heading out of town. And of course, we headed out and we stopped at a place called Jade Springs, about 2 kilometers just down the highway. And there was a whole bunch of people parked there looking back toward town. And it was like a mushroom cloud, atomic bomb, sometimes I describe it, of a smoke above this hill. And it was just like, oh my God, town's got to be gone.
Looking around here, it's evident that the landscape here in Lytton is very different from Vancouver. It's desert-like terrain, vast and open, and very, very dry. But still, there are lessons to be learned here.
By the time we got in the car to go, which probably, I don't know, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, I'm not sure, the embers were coming at us, like as we were getting in the car to go, the smoke, the embers were coming at us. We literally ran for our lives. Like, there was no official evacuation. I mean, I know down the street, people ran into other people's homes and warned them and said, get out. I know they were in their homes and their homes were on fire and they had no idea. We've learned anything can happen at any time, and it can happen very quickly. And so I think that's really important to have a plan.
Today, Lytton stands as a stark reminder of how fast and how fierce a wildfire can be.
Sometimes fires can move faster than we anticipate, and we expect that we will be told maybe when to evacuate or when to get ready to evacuate. And part of what's important is understanding the risk where you live and being made aware of when a fire starts. Is that within, say, that 2 kilometer radius of your home, and maybe you need to think about getting yourself prepared in advance.
It's very different in the city. I can't imagine running from something like we had in the city, but I guess to be thinking about what would I do if a disaster like that happened? Where would I go? What route might I take? I think that would be important.
On the ground at one of the Lytton wildfire evacuation centers was Jackie Kloosterbar, a disaster preparedness expert.
For about 30 years, I've been working with people, getting them prepared for all different types of emergencies and disasters. I spent a lot of time in Chilliwack at the reception center where the evacuees from Lytton were advised to go. They had reception centers set up, across that area to support the evacuees. But seeing the people come in, and they only had mere minutes to get out of town, and many of them were not able to grab their grab-and-go kits, and many did not have grab-and-go kits.
We talk about go bags, having them by the door. To be honest, I don't have a go bag by my door, but what I do have, and maybe it's because I don't own a lot of things like I used to, but I know where my important things are that I would grab if I needed to leave quickly. And I think that's an important piece. Have your insurance papers, have any important documents available, ready, as I said, whether it's in a go bag or know where that is. That's another very, very important piece.
What lessons did we learn from the 2021 wildfire in Lytton that we can implement here in Vancouver?
There was a lot of them, the importance of knowing where you're going. And if you look at it from the Lower Mainland, much bigger than the little town of Lytton, we're going to have gridlock on our highways and our streets. We do in rush hour. Imagine everybody trying to leave at the same time. It's better to go, and maybe you didn't have to, than to get caught and be stuck in that gridlock.
In a neighborhood like this one, on a cul-de-sac where there's only one way in and one way out, the escape route can quickly be blocked. What should residents do if that's the case?
If the escape route is blocked, you're going to have to figure out your plan B. Maybe it's on a bike, maybe it's running down the hill to get to safety, and somebody will pick you up on the way. We saw in LA a lot of people were getting picked up by others that were trying to escape.
We've seen it before where the wind can change a fire's route quicker than an evacuation order can be implemented. If that is the case, what should residents be doing to protect their families?
In the LA wildfires, we saw a lot of people stay behind, and they're protecting their homes. They're scared to leave things. They weren't prepared to go. And they're putting themselves and their family in danger, and first responders are not going to be able to come in and help you once the evacuation order, has been dropped. Staying behind, they may not get out, and we did see that down in California.
Things can be replaced, photos, those kinds of things. Very sad to have lost them. I've had so many people reach out and replace a number of them for me. But yeah, lives are so much more important than things. Things can be replaced.
On the road to wildfire resilience, some of the key building blocks are the methods and materials we use to construct our homes. Felix Weisner is a fire safety engineer, and he says when it comes to building codes here in Vancouver, wildfires aren't even considered.
There is no real wildfire building code in BC. We have a building code that applies to building, and we have wildfire regulations. Between them there exists a gap, because wildfire regulations don't really consider buildings so much. They're more focused on preventing ignition in the forest, limiting fire spread. On the other hand, the building code is mainly concerned with a fire that starts in a building and preventing it from spreading between those buildings, but it doesn't explicitly consider wildfires.
What are your thoughts on the fact that in BC, building codes don't take wildfires into consideration?
I'm okay with that because what's most important is the fuel management. It's about clearing that debris, having the apron around your house free and clear of shrubs, of dried leaves, of all of those things that can catch fire, then send embers. I know in Lytton here, when you look up and down the streets, there are some trees that survived the fire. Down at the end of town, we had brush and dried grass that really built that fire that came into our community, that monster of a fire. But when you look around today, yes, there's some, but we are managing that fuel.
I tend to worry most about North Shore communities, actually. So you think of West Vancouver, North Vancouver, Coquitlam, they're all experiencing this extension of development into the mountains.
The wildland-urban interface around, say, West Vancouver reaches kind of all the way up to the end of like Capilano Lake. But I think it's also important to realize that there's no clear, distinct line between the forest and homes. Driving up into West Vancouver this morning, you're driving through homes that have beautiful yards with trees and shrubs, and all of that is also part of the wildland-urban interface and contributes to the risk.
I think of Vancouver and the close proximity of all the buildings, right? So, you know, as the fire came through here, you know, from one building to the next building to the next building, and I could only visualize that in Vancouver, that kind of thing happening.
We're here in a neighborhood that borders Cypress Provincial Park. When you look around, what are some of the concerns you might have when it comes to these homes?
Well, first thing is obviously, like you said, you have the provincial park right there, so that's the wildland. You have loads of conifers, so that's where wildfire would come from, presumably, when it happens. Other than that, when we look at the actual neighborhood, what I see is a lot of beautiful ornamental vegetation that in some instances goes right next to the building. So we see some bushes, some trees that are very close to the buildings. They can ignite from embers, and then they act as ladder fuels, which means they provide the fire ladder to climb up the building, attack the roof or attack the windows, and then get into the building itself.
So looking around here, how could a fire spread in this neighborhood?
Well, it's important to also consider that a fire may not start just in one house, but it might be multiple spots simultaneously. If there's a big fire behind us from that forest, you can imagine there's a shower of embers, and they will start little spot fires where they can. And that means you have several fires starting at the same time, which can overwhelm the fire service. And then fire can spread from building to building. In this area, the buildings are actually spread relatively wide, but I would be more worried about fire spreading from vegetation into a building, into vegetation, into the next building.
Is there anything homeowners can do to make their homes more fire resilient?
So one big thing is keeping that defensible space, 1.5 meter around the home, no fuel packages, 10 meters around the home, and then also look at the home itself. Make sure any weak spots are covered. So embers cannot get into the building, flames cannot penetrate through gaps somewhere. Ideally, have double glazed windows so that can keep flames out of the building. Make sure your roof is protected from embers from the top.
So what is the solution? Is there such thing as a fireproof home?
There probably is something that minimizes the risk to a certain minimum that's almost 100%, but if you think about it, you could build a concrete bunker with very small windows, no vegetation around it. What we can do is we can reduce the risk in as many buildings as possible to stop a lot of buildings burning at the same time. But making the community resilient is more important by stopping the fire spread, by making sure enough buildings are fire resilient.
Four years on from the 2021 wildfire that ravaged this town, the rebuild is showing signs of life. Looking at your new home here, what were some of the main considerations that were taken into place when it came to the rebuild?
Yeah, so my house is built with hardy board siding, which is a fire-resistant material. In fact, I believe almost all of the homes that have been rebuilt in Lytton are built with that, which is a cement board, fire resistant, as well as the type of roof. So we have asphalt shingles on my roof. Some people put metal roofs on. They're both fire resilient, but I had lots of trees and gardens and that sort of thing. I had a wooden fence. Not sure what I'm going to do for any fencing, but try to make it as fire resilient as possible and using the fire smart principles of keeping debris away from and shrubs and trees and that sort of thing away from the house.
Today, the wildfire season here in BC remains in full force.
It's an aggressive season, and we're not out of the woods yet, and our wildfire season extends into, if not to the end of September. So it's shaping up to be way above average in terms of the numbers of fires we're experiencing and also the amount of forest land that's burned.
In general, we're seeing that wildfires across British Columbia are getting worse. We are seeing growing areas of wildfire impact. We've seen kind of the top 5 wildfire seasons really within the last kind of 6 or 7 years. Since 2017, we've had every year, if not every other year, breaks new records, either in terms of heat and temperatures or in terms of area burned. I think it's also important to recognize that it's not just area burned, it's also impacts on communities. So we're seeing growing evacuations, longer periods in states of emergency for communities, longer periods where people are evacuated, and certainly some of the most devastating impacts in terms of loss of property and loss of life.
Vancouver is already on the road to wildfire resilience, but there's still more that can be done.
Certainly in the last decade, we've seen municipalities, including North Vancouver and West Vancouver, take wildfire seriously and begin to develop things like community wildfire resiliency plans that lay out a whole host of ways to address wildfire risk. I think there's always more that everyone can be doing. So from individuals thinking about fire smart principles, thinking about being better prepared should they have to evacuate, to things like municipal bylaws that might help new developments actually think about fire smart principles as they do develop, from the homes to the way that the city might be designed. And certainly a lot of those principles are there and a lot of them are being practiced. I think it's really a matter of making sure that we're having kind of a toolbox of approaches and being really proactive and not waiting for a fire event to kind of spur us into action.
One team that says they're prepared for an urban wildfire is Vancouver Fire Rescue Services.
So in Vancouver Fire, we have a really layered response model. So we have 152 people who are on duty 24/7, provide fire response across the city. A wildfire in Stanley Park, we would send the closest available apparatus. Generally, we send pumping apparatus to those, meaning they have on board a tank of water. In addition to that, we have 2 fireboats that can pump and distribute water from the marine environment onto shore. We have specialized wildland rigs, which provide improved access to remote spaces within the park.
Say a wildfire were to break out in Stanley Park, what would be the protocol here?
So when a call comes in, it goes to our dispatch center, and the dispatch will then send out the appropriate fire trucks based off GPS location. The tones will go off here in the fire hall. There's a printout that shows the address of where we're going. So the driver will go straight, grab that sheet, look at the address, make sure they orient themselves to where we're going, and then all the members will go to the fire truck where we'll get geared up, which we'll do now.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're gonna get geared up for the call. The first thing we're gonna do is put on our PPE. We have a jacket for you.
Thank you.
The gear that we're gonna wear is gonna be dependent on the call that we're going to. This is our standard structural firefighting gear that we wear.
And how quickly does the team gear up?
So when we're gearing up, we're gonna go as quick as possible, but it's gonna be under 30 seconds or less.
Once we're in the truck, what happens from here?
So now we're going to respond to the incident. We'll have our lights and sirens on. We're going to navigate traffic as we go through, respond to where the call has been dispatched from. Depending on the arrival order of which fire truck is there first. If we're there first, we will take command and become the incident commander. If another fire truck is there first, they will take command and they'll task us out for our different jobs. Because this fire truck, the Wildlands, is smaller, we are able to access some of those trails and smaller roads in Stanley Park to get to where the fire is located.
In our roughly 150 years of the park, we've never had a substantial wildfire, and it's due to the wildfire response. Early detection, fast initial attack, and actioning every fire 100% upon detection.
As climate change continues to fuel wildfire disasters, one solution may lie not in fighting them, but learning to live alongside them.
It's important to recognize that fire has always been a part of coastal forest ecosystems. Indigenous communities coexisted with fire for millennia. They learned to live with it, they learned to utilize it for the benefits of their livelihoods. And our living memory is such now that in many cases, we are only living during a period when we're used to fires being put out. We're used to policies of fire suppression and fire protection being prioritized. And that has caused some detriment to the forests. The forests have become more unhealthy and more susceptible to wildfires. And so what we're seeing as we move forward is with climate change making wildfire seasons worse and fires more likely to impact communities as our communities grow and our values spread out into the forest. We need to learn those principles again of how to coexist with fire.
You know, wildfire is a natural phenomenon. We're never going to totally eliminate it. So our goal ought to be to reduce the toll it takes on our economy and, of course, to protect people and property. I like to be proactive, you know, in anything, whether it be preparing for earthquakes or floods. I think we should be preparing for wildfires because if we don't, this problem is going to get worse as our climate gets warmer. And for anyone who thinks that our climate is not getting warmer, I'm sorry. I'm a scientist. You know, I'm one of the 99.9% of scientists who say that our climate is going to get warmer. And that presents not opportunities, that presents problems for us in this country.